Our next topic is Empower Communication, and this includes the modules Presume Potential, Motivate, and Accept Multiple Modalities. So this is where they fall on our MasterPal framework. Presume Potential is a mindset, and the thing about mindsets is that they cannot be mandated. We can shape mindsets through experiences and information and opportunities, and a lot of this happens incidentally. So this particular module is quite dense. It includes a number of videos, video examples from the perspective of those who use AAC and their families. It includes statements from family members of those who use AAC and what presumed potential means to them. And this module is really intended, I usually take this one at a slightly slower pace so that we really have the opportunity to consider what these ideas mean and how they fit into our framework of understanding of how to best support individuals with unique needs. It is also a module that I think is important that there's a safe space so people really feel comfortable coming to their own understandings about how to understand this information. So I always start with this one because I do think that it is absolutely foundational for having rich and meaningful discussions on the other modules. So this quote really sums up presumed potential. It states, "There is nothing in a caterpillar that tells you it's going to be a butterfly." And when it's delightful imagery, but it really captures this idea that we have no crystal balls and we have no insight into what an individual's upper potential may be. So here are a few key ideas that I would say I've acquired through my own learning about supporting those who use AAC and presuming potential. The first is to presume potential is to acknowledge that all individuals have the ability to learn, to communicate, and to contribute in their own way. And I love those three words, to learn, to contribute, and to communicate, because it really provides wide open doors for all the ways in which we can support individuals, both sort of academically, communicatively, and socially. Another key idea is that it means that we provide opportunities through creating accessible and inclusive spaces. And this piece is important because it means that we're always, it embraces the creativity that we might need to employ to think about how can we make this more meaningful, more accessible, recognizing what an individual is achieving and thinking about, gosh, what's next? How can I expand upon this opportunity? Ultimately, to presume potential or competence is to respect the value of human diversity. What a powerful statement that is, because not presuming competence is to actively do harm. So quality of life, I think, really sits at the center of this conversation. Presuming potential, when we do this, it creates richer and more meaningful interactions. It's kind of a given that this is true for those who use AAC. When we presume potential, when we value their learning, their communication, and their contribution, then that's a feeling. That's something that can be really internalized. But this is also true of communication partners. When we presume potential, when we go into an interaction or a lesson or an environment, and we just assume we hold value in all of the interactions that occur, then we have more fun. We see things more clearly and more thoughtfully, and we're able to act with more intent. So it improves not just the individuals, but also the quality of life of communication partners. And then it also provides a wonderful model of how to interact in respectful and meaningful ways to those who might observe what's happening. So that could include family, it could include staff members, it can include members of the community, but it improves perceptions about how we interact with individuals with disabilities and those with complex communication needs. Ability positive language is one way that we can do this. Ability positive language is descriptive rather than presumptive. So you might say something like, he seeks out books and eats them, or he seeks out books and tears them, or he seeks out books and tosses them. And those are ways that kids explore books early on. But then if later we say he seeks out books and flips the pages but doesn't really attend to them, he seeks out books and looks at the pictures but not the words. In all of those examples, one might also say he's not a reader. But he's not a reader sends a very closed book message, whereas he seeks out books and is it shows where a child might be in their experience of exploring books. So it's much more informative, and it also doesn't shut the door on that child's ability to be a reader. Ability positive language also recognizes potential areas of growth rather than lack of skills. So the power of yet is a conversation that I think is really, what's the word, relevant, really current. I see posters and bulletin boards in schools that talk about the power of yet to build a growth mindset in students. But this is really important in the language that we use as well. If we say he hasn't shown us that yet, then we are again leaving that we're showing that we see that the child has potential to achieve, rather than saying he can't do that, which really doesn't shape any expectations for that student. Another example of ability positive language is language that in which we own our responsibility in thinking outside the box. So we don't know all of the tips and tricks. None of us do. I think that our students teach us as much as we teach us as much as we teach them, and oftentimes more, admittedly. So if we say she is complex, we are still figuring out how she learns. That again, it keeps a wide open door for this child is learning, and she has us a little stumped, but we're working on it, as opposed to she is low, which really puts the onus on the student to perform, rather than on those supporting that child to be creative in how we help her grow. So this is a wonderful quote from Carol Zangari, of Practical AAC, and I think it really captures all of these components, this sort of wraparound nature of presuming potential. Perception drives expectation. Expectation then drives opportunity. Opportunity drives achievement, and then achievement drives perception. The next topic we're going to explore is motivate, and motivate is actually really closely tied to presuming potential. Motivation, we are familiar with categorizing motivation into intrinsic, which are those internal factors, and extrinsic, which are things that motivate us from the outside. So, kind of an everyday example is I hope you love your job. I know that I love my job. I love what I do, and the individuals I get to interact with, it's really, there's a lot of satisfaction in it. I appreciate the opportunity to grow, and I'm really interested in making those connections with people on their communication journeys. But at the end of the day, I do get a paycheck most of the time, not all the time. But that is also, something that, the days that I don't want to get up and get out of bed, I do because I know that is coming. So we are all driven by this combination of intrinsic and extrinsic factors that shape our actions. There's a third component of this that I think is important to consider for our students who are often passive in their lives, and that is the motivation that is sort of inherent in having readiness. So when we have confidence and comfort with what is happening, we know what to anticipate. There's structure that allows things to be predictable. We know what's next. Then there's a certain amount of motivation, and I would say this is very closely tied to intrinsic. But I do like to parse it out a little bit because I think it merits some talking points. But for our students, these might often look like, let me get this out of the way. Social interactions can be part of the intrinsic component. Extrinsic, we might start with edibles, or it might be screen time, it may be a toy or an other activity. And then we might use picture schedules or checklists or first then boards or other ways of helping to provide structure and shape environments so that kids are able to anticipate what's next and achieve. So as we explore these, I just want to put a little bit of, I want to put it in context. Extrinsic motivators are often really beneficial for kind of getting us started or opening the door. But once that door is open, we cannot rely on extrinsic motivators to shape communication and teach communication. We really need to look to what intrinsic factors drive what drives a child, what makes them tick, what makes them want to interact. Because ultimately, communication is an intrinsic experience, intrinsically motivated experience. So we need to make sure we're actually really focusing and on that intrinsic piece and capitalizing on that as we teach communication. Self-determination theory spells this out and sort of takes it to the next level. Self-determination theory posits that there are three basic human needs in order to feel like we are reaching our potential and thriving within that. One of these is competence, so that is our effectiveness. Autonomy, so that's the need to control our own lives, which again, having being able to anticipate what's next is a piece of that, and then relatedness, and this is our belonging. And belonging and social interaction can be tied to, relate to our intrinsic motivation as well. So we want to shape self-determination through, by teaching communication and fostering communication, honoring communication. We are really supporting self-determination in that process. When we lack motivation, we see reduced quality experiences, and these are going to sound pretty familiar. There is often less learning when motivation is not when it's lacking. Disinterest in communication. So when communication devices become a compliance task, or they become quote unquote work, then then clearly motivation is lacking. Oftentimes, negative behaviors will increase when there's lack of motivation. It may be an escape behavior or and learned helplessness as well. So individuals become dependent upon others because they're not motivated to do it themselves. Karen Kangas is a brilliant OT, and I love her take on motivation. She is very passionate. She's an absolute joy to listen to if you ever have the opportunity to hear her speak. But she always says devices are not the activity. And to just kind of spell that out, she describes that motivation and purpose come before access. And when we hear the word access, we often think of alternative access, but she's really talking about any kind of access, the motivation to act, to do, to engage with. So novelty, not favorites, creates interest is one of the things that I've heard her say very often. So when we have favorites, we often have access to our favorites, and our favorites we enjoy them, but there isn't always motivation to talk about them because we have ready access to many of our favorites. But when things are different and interesting, then that's where we really get buy-in. Interest is a necessary component of engagement and therefore learning. And then this last one really again ties into that readiness piece. Teaching the beginning, the middle, and the end of an activity builds neural pathways that are necessary to facilitate learning and independence. So I think that she just spells this out so nicely. It's really easy to see how that ties into, building self-determination through communication. Our last topic in this section is accept multiple modalities. And we accept multiple modalities ultimately by validating all communicative attempts, whether they are verbal or nonverbal. And by doing this, we are teaching that communication is power. So unaided communication are all the ways that we express ourselves that don't require anything extra. So it's our words and our facial expressions, our body language, shaking our head, yes and no, what we look at, kind of, where we're looking. All of these are unaided forms of communication. Sign language is a symbolic form of unaided communication. Our aided communication tools are all the ways that we communicate that do require something extra. So oftentimes we think of this as what AAC is. AAC is actually all of these things, unaided and aided. But it includes things like picture symbols, communication boards and books, mobile communication apps, dedicated devices, light tech tools. It also includes some of our access hardware, such as eye gaze modules or scanning switches and that sort of thing. When we look at AAC and multimodal communication, what we're really looking for is what combination of tools come together to allow an individual to be effective, efficient, and socially appropriate in their interactions. And by socially appropriate, we mean that instead of a child climbing under the desk to avoid something, they're able to express, I want to stop, I need help, I need a break, and that kind of thing. So the modalities that we choose in given interactions varies based on a variety of factors. Some of these include what the communication partner. So who are they interacting with? How familiar is that person with their nonverbal language? What's the purpose of their communication? Are you making a request for something that's in the environment? Are you trying to share information about something that happened yesterday? And then what is the context of the environment? Like, are you outside, at the beach, or somewhere where it's not convenient to have a technology-based tool? Do you need a low-tech tool, or do you need to use nonverbal means? Or are you in a learning environment where you want to have lots of modalities and lots of sort of visual supports to be as specific and concrete as possible? Here's the thing. It doesn't matter what modality a child uses. If they are verbal and have some verbal skills, we're going to honor their verbal communication. If they're using body language and gestures, we're going to honor their gestures. If they're using symbols or a communication board or a high-tech device, we're going to honor the messages that they express. And we are going to follow language development, and we are going to respond in such a way that we are building what their meaning and their understanding. So if a child gestures, we're going to label that gesture and we're going to repeat it. We might reframe it or extend it to let them know that we heard their message. We take that opportunity to model on their device so that they are learning another way, a concrete way, a more specific way, a way that's understood by a variety of communication partners to share that message. Oftentimes, if kids have some verbal skills, their verbal skills are single words or things that they have heard over and over that might be rote, and they're not very generative, or they're not extending their language and their utterance length. So we can accept it when a child says cookie, that they're requesting a cookie. And then we can use their device to say, oh, you want a cookie, or you like the cookie, or the cookies are yum, or the cookies are gone. So we can add information and really sort of flesh out that interaction by seizing the opportunity to use AAC to respond while still honoring the power of the communicative attempt that the child expresses. When we do this, we are developing a sense of I am. We are attributing meaning. And students with complex needs are often really passive participants. Activities happen to them and for them and around them. But when we give them feedback about the communicative attempts and what it means, we are showing them that they are influencing their environment. They can influence the actions of others. And it shows them that they are communicating and we are listening in all the ways that may manifest. So just to recap, presumed potential means to do no harm. Communication doesn't happen without purpose. Motivation is always, always a factor, and intrinsic motivation is what we're looking for really authentic and meaningful communication. Communication partners can also use AAC to model their side of the interaction as we honor all the modalities that an individual uses to communicate.